everyone, my name's Olivia Commons and today I'm going to be looking at police culture whilst addressing the negative aspects that come with it, such as racism. First I'll define the police and explain to you what police culture is and where it came from. We will then look at an example of where police culture has been evident and examine what has been put in place to prevent the negative aspects of police culture. Before we start, it is essential that we have an understanding of what actually is the police. Well, Moore et al. Defines the police as an organisation to control crime, whilst Davis et al. Provides a more in-depth definition, suggesting that the police have several roles such as attempting to reduce crime, maintaining order, keeping the police, acting as state security and even acting as social workers. However, it is important to note that policing is a separate thing to the police, and Rainier explains policing as a range of different roles that the police service provide. For example, the probation service would come under this. Now I'm going to introduce to you a term called police culture, which is also known as cop culture and canteen culture, and really is at the heart of all policing. So according to Manning, police culture is a set of accepted practices, rules and principles of conduct that are situationally applied and generalised rationales and beliefs. Rainier then goes further with this explanation and provides a framework with 7 components that outlines police culture. The first component is this sense of mission, which, due to the uncertainty of a police officer's everyday duties and the possibility that something bad may happen, this goes on to create a sense of loyalty to the group. Although this sounds like a good thing, this can also be problematic, as these police officers are encouraged to be a strong, cohesive group. It can also create an atmosphere that makes it difficult to challenge opinions and behaviours. Secondly, Rainier talks about suspicion, which is obviously a part of the job for being a police officer. But this often leads to police officers reinforcing stereotypes and causing society to believe that the police are racist. Example, McPherson labels the police as institutionally racist in the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and suggests the investigation was improper due to wrongful beliefs such as not believing Stephen Lawrence was a victim at the beginning of the investigation. Bowman and Phillips add to this, stating research evidence has found that the police associate specific stereotypes to ethnicity groups, such as black people associated with violent crime, drug abuse and aggressive and troublesome behaviour. Next is this idea of isolation or solidarity, which goes hand in hand with police loyalty, as the police often work shift patterns restricting relationships outside of work and therefore enhancing loyalty and solidarity within the police. Once again, this idea of solidarity and isolation creates an environment for negative stereotypes to be shared. The fourth component is conservatism, which is this idea that the police tend to have more conservative views and share the same kind of morals, which leads to an us versus their mentality, which, looking back at history, it could be argued that this is due to the police being pitted against the working troublesome class, and Coleman and O'Donnell provided an example of this in their survey conducted on police recruits, as they found they were much more intolerant of issues surrounding migration. At this point, it is worth mentioning that this us versus their mindset could be developed through the social identity theory, which Tajfel says is concerned with the needs of individuals to identify with specific social groups. This idea that these groups give these individuals a sense of belonging and is a framework for their lives which creates a sense of loyalty known in police culture. Although this seems like a positive thing, it is extremely problematic as it creates room for prejudice and discrimination, and these ideas are easily shared and therefore creating this us versus them mindset. Now back to the 7 principles. There is also this idea of machismo, where the norm in policing is seen to have heterosexual relationships where the majority of police officers are traditionally white working class male, which has been heavily criticised over the years, as statistics have shown that in the year 2020 only 31% of police officers were female. Aggression is also encouraged and alcohol is a symbolic feature of policing, so it's not unusual for the police to head off to the pub for a pint with their mates after a shift. Next is this idea of pragmatism, where the idea is to get the job done no matter what the circumstances are. And lastly, it is traditionally believed that the police are racially biased, and as already mentioned, it is widely believed that police hold negative stereotypes to minority backgrounds. Home Office provides statistics from the year March 2018 to March 2019, which show that between this time, there were only 4 stop and searches for every 1,000 white person, compared to 38 for every 1,000 black person. This idea is also validated by the significant amount of police brutality towards ethnic communities in the USA, and movements such as the Black Lives Matter highlight this issue. Now it is important to think about, where did these practices and beliefs come from? Well, Skolnick believes that these attitudes are passed on to all new police officers that join the force and are promoted as necessary attributes to be had in order to be successful at policing. So let's take a brief look at the history of policing to see how we got where we are today. Up until the 1800s, the police were typically weak, uneducated old men that didn't wear a uniform and were not respected in the community. This led to the development of the Metropolitan Police Act 1829, introduced by Sir Robert Peel, who set out 9 principles of policing. The introduction of these principles unified these police officers and led to an unspoken agreement of views and beliefs which could be argued was the beginning of this idea of cop culture. Although these changes were essential at the time, and at first things were looking good and the new police had a positive image, it wasn't long before it came to light that there were many dismissals in the police force, the majority due to drunkenness. And again, this is something not uncommon today, with alcohol being a symbol of cop culture. So now we know what cop culture is and where it possibly came from. Let's take a look at a bit of an example of where cop culture is clearly present. One key example would be the murder of Stephen Lawrence, where the Macpherson report labelled the police as institutionally racist. But I've already mentioned this, so let's talk about the Brixton riots instead. The Brixton riots took place in April 1981, where there was a huge divide between the black community and the police, and fights and riots against the police took place for 3 days. Scarman, 1981, concluded that these were essentially an outburst of anger and resentment by young people against the police. This was because specifically young black people felt that they were victims of racism, and rightly so. Paul et al. 1978 explains how in the 1970s, unemployed black youths were starting to be viewed as troublemakers and potentially criminal, and a moral panic about muggings came to light. Jefferson, 2012, goes on to say that these muggings were increasingly being seen as a black crime, which led to aggressive policing using stop and search powers under the old sus laws, which allowed police to stop and search any person that they were suspicious of, with Jefferson and Grimshaw 1984 concluding that during this time 150 plain clothes officers made 1,000 stop and searches on black males and 150 arrests. Jefferson 2012 also states that this concern about black crime was used to justify a heavy, intimidating police presence at the Notting Hill Carnival. This example clearly highlights that cop culture was present, and it is clear that there is a sense of loyalty between the police officers in an us versus them environment where stereotypes were created and shared. However, Scarman's response to these riots state that although there is a lack of trust in the police as a whole are not racist, but instead there are a few rotten apples which create a negative image of the police. Punch defines these rotten apples theory as an individual's failure rather than the whole system's failure. Rainier kind of supports this rotten apples theory, as he suggests that this police culture mindset varies across police services and it cannot be assumed that police officers share the same values and norms. And Waddington states that this canteen culture does not necessarily transcend to the street and is just a way to make light of a dark job. On the other hand, I'm not so sure that I agree with these points, as the College of Policing 2016 provides statistics showing that in the year beginning May 2015, types of deviance from the police which resulted in dismissals included assault, domestic abuse, drug taking, drink driving, theft, bullying, racist language, possession of indecent images of children, and many more. Now that I have demonstrated police culture in practice, let's take a look at what measures have been put in place to reduce these aspects of police culture, such as racism. In 1984, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act was created, also known as PACE, which replaced these sus laws and meant that the police could not stop and search an individual unless they had reasonable grounds of suspicion, including, for example, the person matched the physical description of a suspect, and a person could not be stopped based off the colour of their skin. Additionally, the police now have a code of ethics that they have to follow. A few include taking accountability for their actions, acting with fairness, honesty and respect. Additionally, the creation of the Equality Act 2010 is a step forward, as it sets out the ways in which it is unlawful to treat somebody and protects individuals with protected characteristics such as sexual orientation and race. The introduction of body cameras was also a huge step forward in policing, as this now meant the police were always being recorded, so it could be argued it reduced the police acting in a racist way, as this is against their code of practice and there would now be evidence against them. Another step forward is the professionalising of the police, where you now need much more qualifications such as a degree, and much more training is required before you can become a police officer. By doing this, it aims to reduce prejudice and stereotyping within the police, and with the hope that as more training and qualifications are needed, this makes the police more professional. In summary then, police officers tend to have extremely close relationships with each other, which can create a sense of solidarity and loyalty, which can then cause prejudiced behaviour from their behalf. And although steps have been taken forward to dissolve this negative image of the police, I'm not sure we are quite there yet, and the Black Lives Matter protests during the summer highlight that police culture is still an ongoing issue. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching!